time, Josh? You tell me. Is that enough time for people? Shall I start now? Yep.
Please, at your
Okay.
convenience. Thank
Good.
you.
All right. It looks like you're there, although some screens are blank, so I guess the video is off. So the theme for the talk this evening is called Nourishment and Wonder. We need a lot of nourishment and wonder, I think, in our lives at this time. And so what we're up against is those, those old chestnuts of desire and aversion. Because when the mind, I probably shouldn't call them old chestnuts, but you're probably tired of hearing of it, but we need to hear of it because that's what totally gets in our way. Because what those things do, desire and aversion, they just disconnect us from our heart. And they disconnect us from intimacy with life. And they disconnect us from wonder and from delight and from amazement and joy. And we get all trampled down by being caught in the sort of the tedium of the familiar, because our mind becomes very narrow when it's filled with desire and aversion, even the littlest bit. And, it's not really our fault, but we've got to work hard to shift this tendency, because we became dismembered in the sense of disconnected. We call these our members, disconnected from our body absolute millennia ago. And because we started to think that we could control our lives, we could control our thoughts, we could control feelings that come through, we can get rid of this, we can hang on to that, and so on. And it's impossible to control the mysterious intricacies, these webs of multi-dimensional, non-linear interplays of elements and form, both seen and unseen. But we think we can control this. So what happened is we stopped listening in its broadest sense. And that sense of being conscious of the 6 sense doors through which we experience the world. That's eye, ear, nose, tongue, touch, and consciousness. And the disconnect is made worse as modern life becomes more about survival and more complex and more inviting of fear. And that is certainly what is happening in these times at the moment. It has become very, very complex and much more inviting of the fear response. So we barely have time, it seems, to turn towards the larger connection with the world. Yet paradoxically, this is what will support us and nurture our wisdom and reduce the ever-increasing capacity that we have for distraction, which then leads to stress. So it's a practice of remembering the body, and remembering, if we remember the body, then we remember the moment. And that's the foundation of mindfulness. So the 6 sense doors are the way we perceive the world: hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and consciousness. These are our body receiving the world, and that's the foundation of mindfulness. So if we take, for example, hearing, what can we learn if we really look into the process of hearing? We can notice that we can attend to a sound and how when the thought process is there, that fractures that hearing process into me as hearer, the hearing process, and the heard. So me, hearer, hearing, and heard. That's what the thought process does. It fractures the moment. So instead of just the simple act of hearing, which is a simple yet also incredibly complex explosion of sound at the sense door of the ear. If you attend to hearing without putting your thinking mind in the way, you will know that it is one flowing event. And the sense of me hearing will drop away in that moment, because the object being heard is not labeled. It is simply that explosion of sound at the sense door of the ear. And this happens when there's good attention. When we have good attention, you will notice how this happens, how the sound of a bird just whistles right through you. When the attention is not fractured and distracted, when we are remembering the body and remembering the moment. And it's a moment of great expansion, of no boundaries, absolutely the way things are, no boundaries. And in that moment, we are our earth body, our elemental self of earth, air, fire, water, and space. And wonder is the momentary losing of one's identity self in the wholeness of all things. That's one way of describing wonder. We know the world through our senses, and David Abraham points out this. He says, although we know the world through our senses, we cannot stretch that bodily empathy out to all of our single species, except by way of the more than human earth. We cannot extend our senses to the whole of humankind without the sensitive and sentient earth getting us there. It is this vast and sensitive sphere glimmering with sensations that grants us that ability to feel and resonate with one another, to ache when another aches. Our real collective flesh is not that of humankind as an autonomous abstraction, but it is the living body of the biosphere breathing. That is us. And that is another poetic way of talking about body, the first foundation of mindfulness, how we connect with all things. So this is a deep realization of body and earth and the sensory perception that makes our world so rich, if we let it. It is also a realization of the enoughness of life. So when we have that realization, we can stop treating life as a consumer item. Me here consuming whatever object we are consuming. That suffering of subject of object dismemberment drops away. So the teachings are radical and liberating. And the Buddha knew it was radical when he intended to sit under a tree until he awakened, because he fully recognized his bondage of this fractured state. And he put his begging bowl on the stream and said, if this bowl floats upstream, then I will be awakened tonight. And his bowl floated upstream. That is the teaching story. The practice goes against the mainstream. The story of the bowl floating up the stream is a metaphor for the regenerative qualities of letting go of the mainstream delusions of separation that are fueled by our aversions. And it takes a very long while to fully recognize that bondage. And when things are easy, it's much harder to recognize that bonding. But now things are not easy. And sometimes that helps us to pay more attention and take that bondage seriously enough to commit to integrating this wisdom practice of presence of mind and body into our daily actions. So the question is, do you fully recognize your bonding, your fractured state? And what is it in each one of us that refuses to see that bondage, if we are refusing? And what would it take to fully recognize that bondage? There's some good questions you can ask yourself if they feel relevant to you. Because we need to have that curiosity about ourselves in order to change habits of mind. We need to question our habits of mind, and that's not easy. And a meditator friend who some time ago did a 3-year retreat in the Tibetan tradition, and when she was asked after the retreat what she learned, amongst many things, she said she learned how difficult it is to change. Yet, when it's a matter of a life-threatening virus, one can go very quickly from touching one's face on an average of 16 times in an hour. Apparently, that's been studied. It's pretty amazing that things like that get studied. So 16 times in an hour, where we don't notice that we're touching our face. And we can go when we need to from not touching our face at all. Now, that might seem very trivial when compared with aversion and attachment, but it is the same. The reason I'm raising it is it's the same mechanism for change. It is simply intention. You could not stop touching your face without an intention to do so. Intention is the precursor of all action. And wise intention is the second link of the Eightfold Path. Intention is very, very powerful. So we can see the role of giving so much authority to the thinking mind in our bondage, our fractured state. We are not trying to get rid of thoughts. The aim is to stop engaging with them. Because when we stop engaging with them, they settle down by themselves. We don't have to force them away. And we also, it helps to see them for what they are. They are conditioned and ephemeral. Conditioned in the sense that they arise from our own past experience or current experience. They're not something we never think, oh, I'm going to think that now. They come and go of themselves. So we cannot think our way into freedom because it is our thinking that traps us in a fractured experience of making everything into separate and discrete objects. And this is far removed from the nature of life that you will experience when your sense doors are unobstructed by aspects of thinking, such as naming, labeling, conceptualizing, theorizing, hypothesizing, and speculation. All of these forms of thinking have a place in daily life, but we must realize how they affect our perception, how those thought processes inhibit connection, inhibit intimacy with life. So the practice of attention, of presence of mind, is a practice of receptivity at the sense doors. Receptivity. So we may see, for example, a stunning sunset. And the stunning is the silencing of our chattering minds for a short time, until we are compelled to say to our companion or to ourselves, because often silence generates a feeling of discomfort, we say, "Oh, what a stunning sunset." And then suddenly there is me and the seeing and the sunset. And the moment is fractured into subject and object. Can we instead rest in that silence of heart and mind for longer? Can we become familiar with the swelling of wonder in our being and let the small beauties of life halt the distraction for a while? The German poet Rilke captures this beautifully. He says, not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition, shut off from the law of the stars. The inner, what is it, if not intensified sky, hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming? Homecoming. That is the nurturance. Coming home. So Rilke speaks to participation as the very structure of perception. Participation is the very structure of perception, is the very structure of life itself. The natural world, which includes ourself, is a web of unceasing communication and interpenetration of species. When we wander in nature, or if you're in the city, wandering those beautiful parks that are available in the city, those massive trees that were planted often hundreds of years ago, or at least 100 years ago. When you wander in amongst the nature, you are embraced by a community of species from which we often feel so separate. So see if you can embrace in return. And the embrace, obviously, it's in the word, isn't it? Embrace can only happen when we are aligned with the body. The sense doors are doors to alignment with that, and with that alignment comes an open, receptive, flexible, and wise way of being in the world. We are no longer putting up a wall against the flow of life, no matter what life is throwing at us. And the writer and broadcaster Julia Baird, in her book Phosphorescence, believes that it's wonder that sustained her through a long and extremely painful experience of cancer. And she had a most extraordinary, excruciating time with that. And she had very little children at the time, and she was writing her will for toddlers. So it was a very tough time for herself. And that sense of opening to wonder sustained her because her mind was stilled by the wonder, and in that wonder is embedded the seeds of realization that there is something much larger than the small world we can feel trapped in when things are difficult. So it is worth generating some wonder in our lives as it supports that silence, it supports that sense of nurturing, it supports that sense of coming home, and it breaks down those constructed boundaries. And an environmental immunologist, Dr. King Lee, he's a Japanese, he discovered in his research that spending time in forests, which he calls forest bathing, you might have heard of it, and I have talked about it before, has a lot of health benefits. It increases immunity, benefits the cardiovascular system, reduces hypertension, relieves anxiety, and so on, and creates mental relaxation. So if you don't have a forest, there are just getting next to a huge tree that you can't put, huge enough that, or it doesn't have to be so huge, just getting next to a tree and realizing that as the tree breathes out the oxygen, you are breathing it in. And as you breathe out your carbon dioxide, the tree is breathing it in. We have such an intimacy with the plants around us. And it really helps to expand our sense, a sense of smallness and often contractedness and tightness. So he called this, not having enough connection with nature, he called this a nature deficit disorder, a nature deficit disorder. And I know some of you are all locked in Melbourne and you can't get out, and this might be a little triggering what I'm talking about, but if you can get yourself out or even look at trees out the window, it's a very powerful thing to do to expand your awareness. And if you can get to walk in a park, and with your expanded awareness, with your sense doors open. And I also read that in Scotland sounds like a marvelous place. You can get a prescription from a doctor for time in the natural world. You can actually get a prescription for nature deficit disorder. That sounds marvelous. So what happens when we have a stress in our normal stress reactions? What happens is that it narrows the field of attention. Just as I said earlier, the presence of desire and aversion, or attachment and aversion, they narrow the field of attention. They are stress places, desire and aversion, and it's not healthy. It's a contraction, of our normal free-floating awareness, which includes information from all our sense doors, our bodies, emotions, and all of their sensory field. It really creates a narrow focus when there's stress. And often when any of us are stressed, we don't realize we're stressed because the focus becomes so narrow. And then a kind friend says, "Oh, you seem stressed." We hate to hear that. But it's really, we hate to be given that feedback, but it's really important to just get through that bit of hatred and go, whoa, I didn't notice because my field of attention has been narrowed. And it's very difficult to know what's going on when you're stressed because of that narrowness. Both inner and outer. So here's an example of how narrow attention can exclude information. So a woman described herself as more and more stressed about them. She had multi-dimensional difficulties in her life that she was facing. And she said that she was surprised to find that in this stress, her critical mind became incredibly active with self-judgment. So this is the example of the narrowing down of focus. So the mind narrowed her just into the mode of criticism, turning it onto herself. And so what she found was, when she expanded her attention, was that underneath that, buried underneath that narrowness of the critical mind, were feelings of fear and grief. And it was very important that she attended to those feelings. And when she attended to them, her body relaxed and her attention expanded. In fact, she embraced herself. She was able to embrace what was there. So if you're willing right now, let's try a little thing about expanding your attention. And this fits very well with the Satipatthana Sutta on the foundations of mindfulness. So maybe if you'd like to try this, it's very short. It's just a few lines while I'm saying it. So just right now, become aware of how you are paying attention. So just think about what sense doors are active now. That's what it means by how you are paying attention. And then to what are you paying attention? What senses are you using? How are your body and breath following your attentional process? Is your attention narrow or wide? Is it remote from the object of your attention, or is it closer and more immersed? So these are questions that you can ask yourself about your attention to help you become more aware of expanding the attention. So if you would like, you can use this form of self-inquiry to bring awareness as the weeks go on to how you're paying attention. So may you find joy and wonder in this extraordinary life we find ourselves in. And may you be nourished by the wonder and intimacies of life. So let's just have a moment of silence.